when I was in high school, I had a creative writing class, and we had to write about a hero. And so I chose to write about my dad, and it was all about how he was, the best domestic relations lawyer in Ohio, and, all about what he does and how great I thought he was. And I got an A on the paper. And she wrote some really lovely comments. I actually still have the paper in my office. And I learned about a year later that at the time I was writing the paper, my dad was representing her husband against her.
Wow.
And so that taught me a little bit of a lesson, right? Know your audience is a good lesson to learn. I employ that in court all the time. Know your audience is important. But it just really gave me like a whole new level of respect for that particular teacher, that she was able to give this, brat an A on a paper writing about her husband's divorce lawyer.
Goodness.
Yeah.